On Christmas Eve, while the city hid behind locked doors and falling snow, a lone man rode his Harley Davidson through the cold like a ghost no one cared to see. Jack Miller was a broken veteran, living out of a forgotten garage, surviving day to day with an old Harley, and a dog who never abandoned him. That night, he stopped his Harley on a frozen highway to save a bleeding old man left to die in the snow. Weeks later, Jack stood in a corporate boardroom, accused of theft, facing prison, homelessness, and total ruin, until the owner of the company walked in, looked at Jack, and recognized the man who had saved his life. And the truth was about to roar louder than any Harley engine ever could. Winter came early to Billings, Montana, the kind of winter that did not announce itself with beauty, but with punishment. The streets were gray and stiff with ice, snow packed so hard it looked more like concrete than powder. Wind moved through the city like a living thing, crawling down alleyways, cutting through coats, finding every weakness people forgot they had. Christmas lights hung from lampposts downtown, blinking weakly against the cold, more out of habit than hope. On the south edge of the city, where warehouses gave way to scrap yards and half-abandoned garages, the nights felt longer. Sound traveled farther there. The groan of trucks on the highway, the rattle of loose metal, the distant howl of wind rolling down from the plains. That was where Jack Miller lived, if what he had could still be called living somewhere. Jack was 47 years old, tall but worn down, his posture slightly bent as if his body remembered carrying weight that was no longer there. His beard had gone mostly gray long before his time, and the deep lines in his face were not from smiling. His left knee never quite straightened, a souvenir from a roadside explosion overseas that doctors had patched but never truly fixed. When he walked, there was a subtle hitch in his step, easy to miss if you weren't looking, impossible for him to forget. He lived in a converted storage garage behind an auto shop that had closed 3 winters ago. The owner never came back, but the padlock stayed broken, and no one cared enough to fix it. Jack had cleaned the place out himself. A mattress on the floor, a folding table, a single propane heater he used only when the cold became unbearable. The walls smelled of oil and rust, and no matter how much he scrubbed, that smell never left. Parked just outside the garage door was his Harley Davidson, a black touring bike from another decade, scratched and dented, but still breathing. Jack took care of the engine better than he took care of himself. He wiped it down even when his hands cracked from the cold. He talked to it sometimes, not because he was lonely, he would never admit that, but because machines made sense. They broke for reasons. People didn't. Inside the garage, curled on an old moving blanket, lay Buddy. Buddy was a large Labrador mix, yellow fur dulled by age, his muzzle almost completely white. His back leg dragged slightly when he stood, the result of a long-healed fracture that never set right. One ear flopped lower than the other, giving him a permanently uneven look. And his eyes, dark, steady, intelligent, followed Jack wherever he went. Buddy did not bark much. He didn't need to. He communicated with presence, with patience, with the quiet confidence of a creature that had survived worse than cold. Jack found Buddy 5 years earlier, tied to a fence behind a grocery store, ribs visible, eyes cautious but unbroken. Jack hadn't planned on keeping him. He didn't plan much of anything back then, but Buddy followed him anyway, limping behind his bike until Jack cursed, stopped, and picked him up. Since then, they had been inseparable. Jack knelt beside Buddy now, rubbing the dog's shoulder where the arthritis always flared in winter. "Cold night," he muttered. Buddy's tail thumped once against the concrete. Jack pulled on his jacket, thick leather, patched at the elbows, faded army insignia still stitched to the inside lining. He hadn't worn the uniform in over 20 years, but he kept the jacket. It reminded him that once he had belonged somewhere. Tonight, he had deliveries to make, food, small packages, holiday rush jobs for people who didn't want to drive in the snow. It wasn't good money, but it was money, enough to buy dog food, enough to keep the lights on another week. Jack clipped Buddy's reflective harness on and opened the garage door. Cold air rushed in immediately, sharp and unforgiving. Buddy stood, stiff but eager, tail wagging despite the pain in his leg. Jack swung a leg over the bike, Buddy settling into the sidecar Jack had welded himself out of scrap metal and stubbornness. The engine roared to life, loud and steady, cutting through the silence. For a moment, Jack closed his eyes and let the vibration settle his nerves. The road always did that. The road didn't ask questions. They rode through the industrial district first, then closer to downtown where storefronts glowed warm behind glass. Jack watched families inside restaurants, laughing, leaning close. He didn't feel bitter, not exactly, just distant, like someone watching a movie he'd already seen but couldn't remember how it ended. At a red light, a man in a clean coat glanced at Jack, then at Buddy, then quickly looked away. Jack was used to that. People saw the bike, the beard, the scars, and made up their minds. It made things simpler. The final delivery took him farther north than usual, closer to the highway interchange. The road there was poorly lit, snow drifting unevenly across the asphalt. Jack slowed instinctively, years of riding teaching him to read the road like a language. That was when Buddy stiffened. Jack felt it through the frame of the bike, through the leash clipped to the sidecar. Buddy stood up, ears alert, nose working the air. Jack followed his gaze and saw something dark ahead, half buried in snow near the guardrail. At first, Jack thought it was debris. Then it moved. Jack eased the bike to the side, heart thudding faster than the engine. The wind howled, pushing snow sideways. He killed the engine and listened. A sound came back, not loud. A groan, thin and strained. Jack swore under his breath and grabbed his flashlight. He approached cautiously, boots crunching on ice. Lying against the guardrail was a man, older, maybe late 60s or early 70s, wearing a thin wool coat that offered little protection against the cold. His hair was white, plastered to his forehead with snow. Blood streaked from a cut above his temple, already darkening as it froze. The man's eyes fluttered open when Jack knelt, confused, afraid. "Hey," Jack said, voice low and steady. "Don't try to move." The man tried anyway, hands shaking, fingers clawing weakly at the snow. I can't feel my hands," he whispered. Jack glanced back at the road. Cars passed occasionally, none slowing. Jack did the math automatically. If he waited for help, it might not come. If he loaded the man up, he'd miss his next job. Miss too many, and he'd be done. Buddy whined softly from the sidecar. Jack exhaled slowly. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over the man's shoulders. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a question. The man looked at him, eyes searching Jack's face as if trying to place it. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to get home." Jack didn't ask where home was, not yet. He helped the man to his feet, surprised by how light he felt, how fragile. The man leaned heavily on Jack's arm, shivering violently. They moved back toward the bike, snow stinging Jack's skin, the cold biting deep now that his jacket was gone. Buddy watched closely, tail wagging uncertainly. Jack settled the man into the sidecar, wrapping him in blankets. Buddy pressed himself against the man's leg, warm and solid, grounding. The man sighed, eyes closing for just a moment. Jack looked down at them, the old man and the dog, both trusting him without hesitation. He felt the weight of that trust settle on his shoulders heavier than any pack he'd ever carried overseas. He climbed onto the bike, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, turning away from the delivery address blinking on his phone. Snow fell thicker now, swallowing the city inch by inch. Jack didn't know yet that this choice would cost him more than he could afford. He only knew one thing, the same thing he'd known his entire life. You don't leave someone behind in the cold. The garage felt smaller, with another body inside. Jack parked the bike just past the broken door and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet rang in his ears, the wind outside filling the silence with a low, constant whistle. Snow slipped through the cracks along the frame, dusting the concrete floor. He worked quickly, breath visible, fingers stiff. The old man stirred as Jack helped him down from the sidecar. He was taller than Jack had expected, but thin, almost hollowed out by age. His coat hung loosely on his frame, buttons mismatched, one sleeve frayed at the cuff. His hands were mottled and trembling, knuckles swollen from cold. "Easy," Jack said, guiding him inside. "Watch your step." The man nodded, eyes unfocused. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though Jack hadn't accused him of anything. "I didn't mean to be trouble." Jack didn't answer. He'd learned a long time ago that reassurance sometimes made people worse. He set the man down on the mattress, propping him up against the wall. Buddy climbed up immediately, settling close, his warm body pressed against the man's thigh. The dog let out a low, steady breath, the kind he only used when he sensed fear. The man's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Jack turned on the propane heater, just long enough to take the edge off. He couldn't run it all night. The tank was almost empty, and refills cost money he didn't have. He draped an extra blanket over the man, then crouched to examine the cut on his forehead. It wasn't deep, but it had bled enough to scare anyone. "What's your name?" Jack asked, holding the flashlight steady. The man blinked, eyes tracking the light. I think it's Thomas," he said after a pause. "Thomas Reed." The name sounded practiced, as if he'd said it many times, but the confidence wasn't there. Jack nodded once. "I'm Jack." Thomas's gaze drifted around the garage, lingering on the bike, the tools, the bare walls. "You live here?" "For now." Buddy lifted his head at the sound of Thomas's voice and wagged his tail slowly, once, then rested his chin back down. Thomas smiled faintly at him. "Good dog," he whispered. Jack cleaned the cut with bottled water and a rag that had once been a t-shirt. Thomas flinched but didn't pull away. He seemed exhausted beyond words, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and finally set it down. "You remember how you ended up out there?" Jack asked. Thomas frowned. He closed his eyes, brow furrowing. "I was driving," he said slowly, or walking. "No, driving. There was a light, too bright. Then I was cold." Jack didn't push. Memory was a fragile thing. He'd learned that overseas, too. Jack checked the time on his phone. He had already missed 2 delivery windows. His app buzzed with a notification he didn't open. He knew what it would say. He went to the small shelf near the door and rummaged through what little food he had. A can of soup. Half a loaf of bread, already stiff. He heated the soup on a single burner, stirring carefully, watching steam rise and disappear into the cold air. Buddy followed him, nails clicking softly on concrete, then sat, waiting. Jack poured a portion into a bowl for the dog, adding warm water to stretch it. Buddy waited until Jack nodded before eating. Thomas watched all of this quietly. "You don't have to," he began. Jack cut him off gently. "Eat," he said, handing over a mug of soup. "Slow." Thomas's hands shook as he lifted it. He sipped, winced, then tried again. Color returned to his cheeks little by little. He didn't finish it, but he didn't refuse either. Outside, the wind picked up. The heater sputtered, then went quiet. Jack cursed under his breath and shut the valve completely. He stood there for a moment, weighing options that didn't exist. Then he pulled his leather jacket off the hook and draped it over Thomas's shoulders. Thomas looked up sharply. "You'll freeze," Jack shrugged. "I've had worse." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. They settled into an uneasy quiet. Jack sat on the folding chair near the door, boots still on, back straight, the way he slept when he slept at all. Buddy positioned himself between Jack and Thomas, a living bridge, head swiveling occasionally toward the door whenever a sound passed outside. Time dragged. Jack's phone buzzed again. This time he looked. Missed delivery. Account under review. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the mental math starting up again. Rent he didn't pay. Bills he couldn't dodge forever. One bad night stacking on top of a dozen others. Thomas shifted. "I can't stay," he said suddenly, panic creeping into his voice. "They'll be looking for me." "Who?" Jack asked. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. His face clouded. "I don't know." Buddy whined softly, pressing closer. Jack stood and knelt in front of Thomas, keeping his movements slow. "It's Christmas Eve," he said. "No one's coming out in this. You'll stay till morning." Thomas studied him, searching for something. Permission, maybe. Finally, he nodded. The night deepened. Snow piled against the door. Jack checked on Thomas twice, adjusting blankets, making sure he was still breathing steadily. Buddy didn't leave his side. At some point, Jack's knee began to throb, sharp and insistent. He shifted his weight, jaw clenched, breathing through it. Pain was familiar. It didn't scare him. What scared him was the quiet fear that crept in when everything else slowed down. Just before dawn, Thomas stirred again. He sat up abruptly, eyes wide. "The glass," he said. "The building with the glass. That's where I was going." Jack leaned forward. "You remember where it is?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Near the trucks, big doors. I worked there, I think." Jack filed that away. "We'll take you in the morning." Thomas sagged back against the wall, the energy draining out of him. Buddy licked his hand once, gently, as if sealing a promise. When light finally crept in through the cracked window, the city looked even colder. Jack brewed coffee from grounds he'd already used twice, black and bitter. He drank it standing up, staring at the frost along the doorframe. He helped Thomas to his feet, wrapped him again, and guided him back into the sidecar. Buddy climbed in beside him without hesitation, resting his head against Thomas's knee. Jack pulled his jacket on over numb shoulders and kicked the bike to life. The engine protested, then settled. They rolled out onto the road as the sky lightened, pink and gray blending together. They drove past warehouses waking up for the day, past trucks idling, past a modern office building with a glass front that caught the early light. Thomas straightened. "There," he said. Relief washed over his face. "That's it." Jack slowed and pulled over. He helped Thomas down. The old man gripped Jack's arm, surprising strength in his fingers. "Thank you," he said, clear-eyed for the first time. "You didn't have to stop." Jack nodded once. "Take care of yourself." Thomas hesitated, then turned toward the building. He walked unsteadily, but with purpose, disappearing through the glass doors. Jack watched until he was gone, then he climbed back onto the bike. His phone buzzed again. "You're late. Get here now." Jack sighed, the sound lost in the wind. He turned the bike toward the warehouse district, boots crunching on ice as he pulled away, Buddy looking back once before facing forward again. Christmas morning had arrived, cold and unforgiving, and Jack Miller was already behind. The warehouse didn't care that it was Christmas. Jack felt it the moment he rolled into the parking lot. Engines already running, forklifts whining, dock doors slamming open and shut like irritated mouths. Snow had been plowed into dirty ridges along the edges of the asphalt, and the air smelled of diesel and cold metal. The sun was up now, but it offered no warmth, only light sharp enough to make the ice glare. Jack parked his bike at the far end of the lot where he always did, away from the cameras and the newer trucks. Buddy climbed out of the sidecar slowly, stretching his stiff leg before planting himself beside the bike. Jack rested a hand on the dog's head for a moment longer than necessary. "Stay," he said quietly. Buddy sat, alert but calm, watching Jack with steady eyes. Inside, the warehouse was loud in a way that felt intentional, as if noise itself were part of the job. Steel racks towered overhead, stacked with sealed boxes and wrapped pallets. Men and women in reflective vests moved fast, heads down, voices clipped. Holiday or not, quotas didn't change. Jack clocked in nearly an hour late. The machine beeped once, indifferent. "Nice of you to join us," the voice came from behind him. Ross Bennett, floor supervisor, stood near the clipboard station. Ross was in his mid-30s, clean-shaven, hair always perfectly trimmed, boots spotless even on days like this. He wore his authority lightly, like something he had practiced in the mirror. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "Road conditions," Jack said. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Ross glanced at the timestamp on the screen. "You've got 3 late marks this month." Jack didn't respond. He knew better. Ross sighed theatrically and checked his clipboard. "We're short today. People calling in sick, or pretending to." His eyes flicked up. "Grab gloves. Dock 3. Jack nodded and moved past him without another word. He pulled on his gloves, stiff, cracked leather. "See, stand lower," and took his place near the loading bay. Work helped, sometimes. The repetition, lift, slide, secure, label, move on. His knee complained almost immediately, a dull burn that sharpened with every bend, but he ignored it. Pain was manageable. Falling behind wasn't. From where he worked, Jack could see Buddy through the open dock door, sitting just outside the chain-link fence. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, just watched. Every now and then, another worker glanced at him and shook their head. "That your dog?" one of the loaders asked during a brief pause. The man's name was Luis, early 20s, eyes always tired. "Yeah." "He don't get cold?" "He does," Jack said. "He just doesn't complain." Luis nodded slowly, as if that made sense. By midday, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it until Ross waved him over. "Delivery run," Ross said, handing him paperwork. "Secure load. Off-site storage." Jack scanned. The forms. "Where at?" Ross shrugged. "North side, same as last time." Jack frowned. "I didn't—" Ross cut him off. "You want the hours or not?" Jack folded the paper and tucked it away. "Yeah." "Good," Ross said. "Move fast. Cameras are on." Jack didn't miss the emphasis. They worked through the afternoon, loading sealed boxes onto a marked truck. Ross stayed close, directing, pointing, occasionally correcting Jack's placement. Jack followed instructions to the letter. He always did. By the time they finished, the sky had darkened again, winter light fading early. Jack clocked out sore and exhausted, pay barely enough to cover food and gas. When he returned to the bike, Buddy stood immediately, tail wagging, relief obvious. Jack crouched and pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's. "We're good," he murmured, though he wasn't sure why he said it. They rode home under falling snow, the city quieter now. At the garage, Jack fed Buddy and checked his leg, rubbing ointment into the joint. Buddy leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Jack lay on the mattress, listening to the wind, replaying Ross's voice in his head. Cameras are on. The next days blurred together. Jack worked longer shifts, took extra runs, skipped meals. Buddy stayed close, following him from room to room, from bike to bed. The cold worsened. The heater ran out completely. Jack started sleeping in his jacket again. 3 weeks passed. It happened on a Tuesday. Jack noticed it first in the way people stopped talking when he walked by. Forklifts slowed, conversations cut short. He caught his name whispered near the lockers. Money's missing. Inventory. Whole pallets gone. By noon, security locked the outer gates. 2 men in dark coats stood near the office, not wearing company badges. Corporate. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. Ross called him in just before the end of the shift. "They've got questions," he said, tone casual. "Routine stuff." Jack followed them upstairs to an office he had never been in. Clean walls, warm air, a table with chairs already set. The men didn't ask much at first, just dates, times, delivery logs. Jack answered calmly, honestly. He pointed to the paperwork, the signatures. One of the men slid a folder across the table. "These transfers," he said, "they're under your name." Jack stared at the pages, his handwriting, his ID code, his shift. "That's wrong," Jack said slowly. "I moved what I was told to move." "By who?" Jack hesitated, then answered. "Ross." Ross wasn't in the room. By the time Jack walked back downstairs, the looks had changed. Curiosity hardened into judgment. Luis avoided his eyes. Outside, Buddy sensed it immediately. He whined, pacing as Jack unlocked the bike. Jack rested his hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. "It's nothing," he said, though his voice didn't convince even him. That night, Jack sat in the garage longer than usual, staring at the wall. He thought about the old man, Thomas, about the glass building, about choices that felt small at the time and heavy afterward. Buddy lay beside him, head on Jack's boot, breathing slow and steady. For the first time since that night on the highway, Jack wondered if stopping had started something he couldn't outrun. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless, covering tracks, hiding everything beneath the same white layer. And somewhere inside the warehouse office, decisions were already being made without him. The suspension came quietly. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just an email printed out and slid across the table like a receipt. Jack stood in the office doorway while one of the corporate men cleared his throat and spoke in a tone meant to sound neutral. "Effective immediately," the man said. "You are placed on unpaid suspension pending investigation." Jack looked at the paper, black letters on white, dates, his name spelled correctly, which felt like an insult all its own. "For how long?" Jack asked. The man shrugged. "Depends." "On what?" "On what we find." Jack nodded once. He didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that arguing only gave people something else to write down. Ross stood against the far wall, arms folded, expression carefully blank. He didn't meet Jack's eyes, not once. "Turn in your badge," the corporate man said. Jack unclipped it from his belt and set it on the table. The small plastic rectangle made a soft sound when it landed, lighter than it should have felt after all the hours it represented. "Security will escort you out," the man added. "That won't be necessary," Jack said. "I know the way." They didn't stop him. Jack walked through the warehouse floor, for what might be the last time, boots echoing on concrete. People watched him openly now. No more pretending. Luis stood near the racks, hands still, eyes uncertain. Jack gave him a small nod. Luis hesitated, then nodded back, quick and guilty. Outside, the cold hit him hard. Buddy stood up the moment Jack came into view, tail wagging once, then slowing when he sensed something was wrong. Jack knelt and rested his forehead against the dog's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of fur and oil and road dust. "It's okay," Jack said, though the words felt thin. "Let's go." They rode back to the garage under a sky the color of steel. Snow fell lightly, almost politely, as if the storm itself was tired. Jack's mind replayed the meeting in fragments. The paper, Ross's silence, the word unpaid echoing louder each time. At the garage, Jack shut the door and leaned against it for a long moment. Eyes closed. Buddy pressed against his leg, solid and warm. He checked his phone. No new messages, no missed calls. The app that once tracked his deliveries showed nothing but empty space. Jack sat at the folding table and spread out his bills. Rent for the garage space, power, gas, food. The numbers didn't add up. They never did. But now there was no margin left to pretend. He skipped dinner and fed Buddy instead. The dog ate slowly, then looked up as if asking where Jack's portion was. Jack waved him off. "Already ate," he lied. The next morning, Jack woke before dawn out of habit. For a moment, he reached for his jacket, then remembered there was nowhere to go. He sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the wind scrape against the building. By mid-morning, hunger set in sharp and insistent. Jack drank water to quiet it. He took Buddy for a short walk near the rail yard, keeping him moving to ease the stiffness in his leg. People passed without looking. A man in a clean coat crossed the street rather than walk past them. At noon, a security vehicle rolled slowly past the garage and stopped. Jack felt his stomach drop. Two officers stepped out, boots crunching on ice. One was older, gray at the temples, face weathered but not unkind. The other was younger, hand resting near his belt out of habit rather than threat. "Jack Miller?" the older one asked. "Yes." "We need to ask you a few questions." Jack nodded. "About the warehouse." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You already know?" Jack shrugged. "Hard not to." They didn't come inside. Jack answered where he stood, hands visible, voice calm. Dates, routes, who told him to move what. He told the truth the same way each time. Buddy sat at Jack's feet, watching the officers closely, ears alert. When the younger officer shifted his weight, Buddy stood, placing himself half a step in front of Jack. "Easy," Jack murmured, resting a hand on Buddy's head. The older officer noticed. "Good dog." Buddy sat again, but didn't relax. When the questions ended, the officers exchanged a look. "Don't leave town," the older one said. Jack almost laughed. "Wasn't planning on it." After they left, Jack felt the weight settle in fully for the first time. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. A quiet understanding that once a story started moving without you, it didn't need your permission to finish. Days passed slowly. Jack sold tools he couldn't replace. He canceled his phone plan and relied on free Wi-Fi from the closed auto shop next door. He ate once a day. Buddy always ate first. The cold deepened. At night, Jack wrapped Buddy's blanket around the dog and used an old tarp for himself. He dreamed of the desert, heat, noise, orders shouted through radios. He woke with his jaw clenched, heart racing, Buddy licking his hand until the shaking stopped. One evening, Jack noticed a man watching from across the street. The man looked away when Jack met his eyes. The next day, a rumor reached Jack through Luis, who stopped by briefly under the pretense of returning borrowed gloves. "They're saying you ran those pallets yourself," Luis said quietly, "that you knew." Jack stared at the concrete. "You know me better than that." Luis hesitated. "I know, but people talk." That night, Jack sat on the floor beside Buddy, rubbing the dog's legs slowly, methodically. "I did what I was told," Jack said aloud, as if the walls might listen. "That's all I've ever done." Buddy rested his head on Jack's knee, steady and warm. 3 days before Christmas, another notice arrived, this one taped to the door. Notice of lease termination. Jack read it twice, then a third time. He folded the paper carefully and set it on the table. He didn't swear. He didn't shout. He just sat there, staring at the wall until the light faded completely. Buddy whined softly. Jack knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, pressing his face into Buddy's fur. For the first time in years, his chest tightened painfully, breath hitching before he could stop it. "I won't leave you," he said hoarsely. "I promise." Outside, Christmas lights blinked on along the street, cheerful and distant. Inside the garage, the air grew colder by the minute. Jack lay down beside Buddy that night, fully dressed, boots still on. He listened to the wind and thought about the old man with the glass building, about choices that seemed small when you made them. Somewhere, the truth still existed. He believed that. He had to. But belief didn't keep the cold out, and as Christmas drew closer, Jack Miller understood something he hadn't let himself admit before. Kindness didn't protect you, it just made the fall quieter. The call came just after dark. Jack had been sitting on the floor, back against the cold wall, Buddy's head resting on his thigh. He was counting breaths, not because anyone told him to, but because it kept the memories from pushing too hard. When the phone vibrated, the sound felt louder than it should have. Unknown number. Jack let it buzz twice before answering. Jack Miller? Mr. Miller, a woman said, professional and distant. This is corporate security. We need you to come in tonight. Jack closed his eyes. It's after hours. Yes, she said. That's correct. For what? A continuation. Jack looked down at Buddy. The dog had lifted his head, ears forward, reading the tension in Jack's body. When? Now, the woman said. We'll be waiting. The line went dead. Jack stood slowly, joints protesting. He fed Buddy the last of the kibble, adding warm water to make it stretch. He didn't eat. He clipped the leash on and pulled his jacket tight. Stay close, he said. The warehouse parking lot looked different at night. Too clean, too empty. Lights buzzed overhead, casting hard shadows that didn't move. Jack parked where security directed him and walked inside, Buddy at his heel. They stopped him at the door. No dogs, the guard said, hand up. Jack shook his head. He stays. The guard hesitated, glanced toward the office. After a moment, he sighed. 5 minutes, he muttered. Tie him outside. Jack knelt, wrapped the leash around a post, and pressed his forehead to Buddy's. I'll be right back. Buddy didn't like it. He whined softly, pawing once at Jack's leg before sitting, eyes locked on the door. Inside, the room was warmer than it had any right to be. 3 people waited at the table this time. 2 from corporate, 1 new face. A man in his late 60s, sharply dressed even now, silver hair combed back neatly. He watched Jack enter with careful attention, eyes sharp, assessing. Sit, the woman said. Jack sat. They slid documents across the table, timestamps, access logs, camera stills, grainy, distant, but clear enough to be convincing. Jack loading boxes, Jack sealing pallets, Jack driving out. You were alone, the woman said. No, Jack replied. Ross was there. The older man leaned forward slightly. You're certain? Jack met his gaze. Yes, sir. The man studied him for a long moment, then leaned back. We'll verify. Jack didn't miss the way the woman exchanged a glance with her colleague. He knew that look. He'd seen it before, in different rooms, different uniforms. The look that said the decision was already made. Until then, the woman said, your suspension stands. You are not to contact employees or access company property. Jack nodded. As he stood to leave, he heard barking. Not loud, not frantic, controlled, insistent. Buddy. Jack turned just as the door opened behind him. Buddy, strained against the leash, barking at the table, at the faces, at the tension in the room, he could feel even without understanding the words. The older man rose slowly from his chair. That dog, he said quietly, is yours? Yes, Jack said. The man's gaze lingered on Buddy for a second longer than necessary. He's loyal. Jack didn't respond. He unclipped the leash and guided Buddy out. The ride home was silent. Snow drifted down thick and steady, softening the world into something smaller. Jack's thoughts felt heavy, slow. He didn't think about defense or explanations anymore. He thought about warmth, food, shelter. When they reached the garage, a pickup truck was parked nearby. The engine idled. Jack's stomach tightened. The landlord stood by the door, collar turned up against the cold. Mark Henson, early 50s, tired eyes, a man who liked things simple and problems far away. Evening, Mark said. We need to talk. Jack already knew what he would say. Got a call, Mark continued. Company security. They say you were under investigation. Jack didn't interrupt. I can't have trouble on my property, Mark said. Not now. Jack nodded once. I'll be out. Mark hesitated, surprised. By Friday? That's fine. Mark shifted his weight. You got somewhere to go? Jack looked down at Buddy, then back up. We'll manage. Mark sighed, relief crossing his face. I'll leave the door unlocked till then. After the truck pulled away, Jack stood in the snow for a long time, breath fogging. Buddy leaned into his leg solid and warm. Inside, Jack packed slowly. Tools first. Clothes. The blanket Buddy slept on. He left the mattress. He didn't have the strength to move it. That night, the cold felt sharper than ever. Jack sat on the floor, back against the wall, Buddy pressed tight against him. Memories came uninvited. Dusty roads, radio chatter, orders shouted and obeyed without question. He whispered without realizing it. I did what I was told. Buddy lifted his head and licked Jack's hand, once, then again, grounding him in the present. The next morning, Jack woke to barking outside. He reached for his jacket and froze. Buddy wasn't beside him. Jack bolted upright, heart pounding. He rushed to the door. Buddy stood outside, barking toward the street. A car idled nearby, hazard lights flashing. A man stood beside it, older, disoriented, hands shaking in the cold. Jack recognized him instantly. Thomas. The old man looked thinner than before, coat hanging loose, eyes clouded. Buddy stood between him and the street, body angled protectively, barking at passing cars when they got too close. Jack ran forward. Thomas? The old man looked at him, confusion clearing just a little. He swallowed. I didn't know where else to go. Jack guided him inside without a word. He sat Thomas down, wrapped him in blankets, moved with practiced efficiency. Thomas looked around, recognition flickering. You helped me, he said softly. You and the dog. Buddy wagged his tail once and lay at Thomas's feet. Jack nodded. You shouldn't be out there. Thomas's hands trembled. They said I wandered off again. Jack paused. Who's they? Thomas frowned, searching. My driver, my assistant. His eyes widened suddenly. The company. Jack felt something shift, barely perceptible, like a gear catching. You remember where you work? Jack asked carefully. Thomas nodded. The glass building. Jack said nothing. He poured tea, hands steady despite the storm inside his chest. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside the garage, with an old man warming his hands and a loyal dog standing guard, the silence grew heavy, not empty, but waiting. Thomas slept for nearly 6 hours. Jack hadn't planned it that way. He had meant to wake the old man sooner, ask questions while the memory was still fresh, while the thread was still there to pull on. But exhaustion had settled over Thomas like a heavy blanket, deeper than simple fatigue. Jack watched him breathe, slow and uneven at first, then steadier as the night wore on. Buddy stayed close, lying perpendicular to Thomas's legs like a guardrail. Every time Thomas shifted, Buddy lifted his head, checked, then settled again. Jack sat at the folding table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea that had long since gone cold. He didn't sleep. He couldn't afford to. Too many things balanced on what might happen when Thomas opened his eyes again. Outside, snow buried the tracks Thomas must have followed to reach the garage. By morning, there would be no evidence he had ever been there at all. Just before dawn, Thomas stirred. His eyes opened slowly, clearer this time. He looked at the ceiling, then the walls, then Jack. Recognition passed over his face. Not confusion, not panic, but something closer to embarrassment. I wandered, Thomas said quietly. Jack nodded. You did. Thomas exhaled. Again. Buddy rose and approached, tail wagging cautiously. Thomas reached down and rested a hand on the dog's head. His fingers didn't shake this time. I'm sorry, Thomas said, though Jack still hadn't accused him of anything. I don't always know when it's happening. Jack pulled another blanket around Thomas's shoulders. You're safe. Thomas looked at him, eyes sharper now. Are you? The question landed harder than Jack expected. Jack didn't answer right away. He poured fresh tea, handed it over, watched Thomas take a careful sip. I'll manage. Thomas studied him the way someone studies a complicated machine, quietly, thoroughly. That's not an answer. Jack shrugged. It's the only one I've got. They sat in silence for a moment, the heater off, breath visible in the cold. Thomas looked down at his hands. They tell me I shouldn't be alone, he said, that I forget things. What things? Jack asked gently. Thomas frowned. Important ones. Memory came back in pieces. A desk, glass walls, the smell of coffee, a voice, his own, giving instructions. A clipboard, a warehouse floor loud enough to make his head ache. A man standing near the dock, tall, tired, moving carefully like his body hurt. Thomas's eyes lifted suddenly. You, he said. Jack looked up. What? I saw you before, Thomas said. Not just that night, at the warehouse. Jack's pulse quickened. but he kept his voice steady. I work there. Worked. Thomas nodded slowly. You were loading boxes. It was early. Christmas morning. His brow furrowed. I remember thinking you looked like someone who didn't get holidays. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thomas's face tightened. They said I wandered off that day, but I didn't. He pressed his fingers to his temple. I went down to the floor. I wanted to see the operation myself. It's what I've always done. Jack's chest felt heavy now. Who's they? My assistants, Thomas said. My board. He shook his head. They don't like it when I do that anymore. Do what? Pay attention. Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating. There was a supervisor, younger, clean cut. He snapped his fingers softly. Ross. Jack's jaw tightened. He was talking, Thomas continued, pointing. He said something about off-site storage. Thomas opened his eyes, suddenly alert. That wasn't scheduled. Jack leaned forward. You're sure? Yes. Thomas's voice firmed. I questioned it. He told me it was temporary. Routine. Jack swallowed. And me? Thomas looked at him. You didn't speak much. You listened. You did what you were told. Jack sat back slowly. The pieces were lining up now, sharp and undeniable. He had spent weeks doubting himself, replaying conversations, wondering where he'd misstepped. He hadn't. Thomas exhaled shakily. Then there was pain, my head, lights too bright, someone guiding me away. His hand tightened on Buddy's fur. I don't remember leaving. Jack nodded. I found you that night, by the highway. Thomas looked down, shame flickering across his face. And you took me in, fed me, even though you had nothing. Jack shrugged. You were freezing. Thomas studied him, long and quiet. You missed work, yes. And now, Thomas said slowly, you're paying for it. Jack didn't deny it. Outside, a truck passed, tires crunching over ice. Buddy lifted his head, then relaxed again. Thomas straightened. I need to go back. Jack hesitated. You sure that's a good idea? Thomas nodded. It's time. He met Jack's eyes. But not alone. They prepared quietly. Jack packed what little he had left. Tools he couldn't carry stayed behind. He left the mattress again, folded the blanket Buddy favored over his arm. As they stepped outside, the city was waking up. Frost clung to every surface. The glass building stood in the distance, reflecting pale winter light. They rode together, Buddy pressed between them in the sidecar, the engine's vibration steady and grounding. Thomas watched the streets pass with focused attention. No confusion now, no drifting. At the building, Thomas stood a little straighter. He paused before the doors, hand resting on the glass. They think I'm fragile, he said quietly. They think they can decide what I'm allowed to see. Jack waited. Thomas turned to him. If I walk in there, things will change. Jack nodded. For better or worse. Thomas smiled faintly. That's usually how truth works. Inside, security recognized. Thomas immediately. Shock rippled through the lobby. Phones came out, voices lowered. Thomas walked past them without stopping. Get me the footage, he said calmly. December 25th, morning, dock cameras, audio, if you have it. Someone stammered. Sir, we'll need approval. I'm giving it, Thomas said. Jack stood back, hands visible, posture neutral. Buddy sat at his heel, alert. As they waited, Thomas leaned closer to Jack. No matter what happens, he said, you did the right thing. Jack didn't answer. He wasn't ready to believe that yet. On the screen, frozen images began to load. Jack saw himself from above, smaller than he remembered. Saw Ross step into frame, saw the clipboard. The room grew quiet. The truth was there now, undeniable, waiting only for someone with the authority and the courage to say it out loud. And for the first time since the snow-covered night on the highway, Jack Miller felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not relief. Hope. The conference room was colder than the rest of the building, not in temperature, but in feeling. The kind of cold that came from people waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Jack stood near the wall, hands loose at his sides, Buddy sitting close enough that his shoulder brushed Jack's boot. Across the table, executives gathered in neat rows, tablets and folders open, eyes shifting between the screen and the man at the head of the room. Thomas Reed sat upright, both hands resting on the table. He looked older than he had the night Jack found him on the highway, but clearer, sharper. The confusion was gone. What remained was focus. Play it again, Thomas said. The screen flickered back a few seconds. Grainy footage filled the room. Wide angle, Dock 3, December 25th. Morning light cutting in through the loading bay. Forklifts moving in predictable lines. Jack watched himself on screen without flinching. There he was, loading sealed boxes, checking straps, sealing pallets. His movements were efficient, practiced, unremarkable. He could have been anyone. Then Ross stepped into frame, clean jacket, clipboard tucked under his arm. He leaned close, spoke briefly, pointed toward a marked truck. The audio cut in, thin but clear enough. "Take those to off-site," Ross's voice said. "I'll log it." The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Another executive leaned closer to the screen. Thomas didn't move. "Pause," he said. The image froze with Ross mid-gesture. "That transfer," Thomas said calmly, "was not authorized." Silence followed. A man at the far end of the table spoke. "Sir, the logs were falsified," Thomas said, "by someone with supervisor access." All eyes turned slowly toward Ross, who stood near the door, arms crossed, posture rigid. "That's ridiculous," Ross said. He laughed once, sharp and hollow. "You wandered off that day. Everyone knows that." Thomas turned his head, slowly, deliberately. "I remember wandering off," he said. "What I didn't do was stop paying attention." Ross opened his mouth, then closed it. "Play the next clip," Thomas said. The footage advanced. Timestamps rolled forward. Ross appeared again, signing forms. Jack moved in and out of frame, always working, never speaking. Audio confirmed it. "You followed instructions?" Thomas asked, without looking away from the screen. "Yes, sir," Jack said. His voice was steady. Thomas nodded. "As you were hired to do." Ross stepped forward. "He's lying," he said quickly. "He was alone. I wasn't even scheduled that day." Thomas finally looked at him. "Then explain your access code." A tablet slid across the table toward Ross. Timestamps, entry logs, digital signatures. Ross's face drained of color. "That's not," he began. "Enough," Thomas said. Security moved without being told. Ross's protests tangled into half-formed sentences as hands took his arms. His clipboard fell to the floor, plastic cracking sharply. Jack watched, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to exhaustion. As Ross was escorted out, the room exhaled collectively. Whispers spread, phones buzzed. Thomas stood slowly. He walked toward Jack and stopped in front of him. "You fed me," he said quietly, "when I was lost, when it would have been easier to shut the door." Jack said nothing. Thomas turned to the executives. "Suspend the suspension," he said, "effective immediately." A woman nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Correct the records," Thomas continued. "Publicly." More nods. Thomas looked back at Jack. "This does not undo what you went through." Jack shook his head. "I don't need it undone." Thomas studied him. "That's not what justice is." Outside the room, workers gathered, pretending not to listen. When Jack stepped out, conversations stopped, then resumed differently. Not whispers now. Questions, regret, respect, awkward and late. Luis caught Jack's eye. "I'm glad," he said quietly. Jack nodded. They rode home together that evening, Jack and Buddy, the city looking different somehow. Not kinder, just clearer. At the garage, Jack packed what little remained. He wasn't sure what came next. The lease termination still stood. The nights were still cold, but something fundamental had shifted. Later that night, Jack's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Come in tomorrow morning. We need to talk about next steps." Jack looked down at Buddy, who thumped his tail once, sensing the change. "Tomorrow," Jack said softly. Outside, snow fell lightly, settling over the city without judgment. For the first time in weeks, Jack slept. Not deeply, not without dreams, but without fear. The office looked different in daylight. Jack noticed it the moment he stepped inside. Not because the walls had changed or the furniture had moved, but because he no longer felt like an intruder. He stood near the door, jacket still on, Buddy sitting calmly at his side, tail resting on the floor. People passed in the hallway and nodded, some awkwardly, some with genuine warmth. No one avoided his eyes anymore. Thomas Reed sat behind the desk, papers stacked neatly in front of him. He looked rested for the first time since Jack had known him. Not younger exactly, just steadier. "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Jack sat. Buddy stayed where he was. Thomas didn't comment on the dog. He didn't need to. "I won't insult you by pretending this fixes everything," Thomas said. "You lost income, you lost stability, you were pushed out of your home." Jack nodded once. "It happens." Thomas studied him. "It shouldn't." He slid a folder across the desk. Jack didn't open it right away. He had learned not to rush moments like this. "Your position has been reinstated," Thomas continued, "with back pay and benefits." Jack raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's more than I had." "It's the minimum," Thomas said, "not the reward." Jack finally opened the folder. Contract, title, operations supervisor, regional logistics, real salary, health coverage, a housing stipend. Jack closed it slowly. "I didn't help you for this." "I know," Thomas said. "That's why you're getting it." They sat in silence for a moment. Buddy shifted, tail tapping once against the floor. "There's something else," Thomas said. "I'm stepping back, not fully, but enough." He smiled faintly. "The company needs people who pay attention." Jack leaned back slightly. "You're offering me responsibility." "Yes." Jack thought about the warehouse floor, the cameras, Ross's clipboard, the way systems failed quietly when no one watched them closely enough. "I'll do the job," Jack said. "I won't play politics." Thomas nodded. "Good." When Jack stood to leave, Thomas added, "And Jack?" "Yes?" "I remember that night clearly now. You didn't hesitate." Jack paused. "Most people don't. They just don't like admitting it." Outside, the air was cold but clean. Snow crunched under Jack's boots as he walked to the bike. Buddy jumped into the sidecar easily, tail wagging more than usual. They didn't go back to the garage. Instead, Jack rode north, past the rail yard, past the warehouses, to a small duplex on a quiet street. Nothing fancy. Brick exterior, lights in the windows. A landlord who didn't ask many questions and didn't care about bikes as long as the rent came on time. Jack unloaded what little he had: tools, clothes, Buddy's blanket. He left the door open while he worked, letting fresh air sweep through the space. That night, they ate a full meal. Nothing elaborate. Meat, bread, something warm. Buddy finished his bowl and then waited patiently, hopeful. Jack laughed softly and gave him a little extra. Outside, Christmas lights blinked on across the street. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old holiday song, tinny and imperfect. Jack sat on the floor, back against the couch, Buddy stretched out beside him. The house creaked quietly, settling around them. A knock came at the door. Jack froze for half a second before standing. Buddy lifted his head, alert but calm. Thomas stood outside, bundled in a thick coat, driver waiting by the curb. "I didn't want to intrude," Thomas said, "but I wanted to see where you landed." Jack stepped aside. "Come in." Thomas looked around, nodding. "It suits you." They stood awkwardly for a moment, two men unsure how to end something that didn't feel finished. "I'm glad you stopped," Thomas said finally. Jack nodded. "Me too." After Thomas left, Jack closed the door and leaned his forehead against it. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. Later, Jack took Buddy out for a ride. Just the two of them. No deliveries, no deadlines. The Harley purred beneath him, steady and familiar. They stopped at the edge of town where the road opened up and the sky stretched wide. Snow fell lightly, softening the world. Jack shut off the engine and listened to the quiet. "You did good," he told Buddy. Buddy wagged his tail, content. Jack looked out at the road ahead, not with fear, not with urgency, just with readiness. For the first time in a long time, he knew where he was going, and he knew he didn't have to get there alone. Sometimes, God's miracles don't come as light from heaven. They come when ordinary people choose kindness in moments that cost them everything. Jack didn't save a life to be rewarded. He did it because it was right. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you and guide your path.